You don't remember the moment it happened. But something was taken from you. Not in some loud, violent way. No, it was subtle, silent. It happened the day they told you to sit still, to keep your hands to yourself, to raise your hand only if you have permission to speak. From that moment on, you stopped listening to your hands, and they stopped speaking to you, but they never stopped holding your truth. This is not a metaphor. It's not poetry. It's a fact as ancient as the wind. Your hands are not just flesh and fingers. They are instruments of energy, conductors of intention, mirrors of your internal state. And if that sounds strange, if a part of you resists that idea, that's not skepticism, that's conditioning. Because once upon a time, your hands were sacred. They shaped not only clay and wood, but energy, healing, presence and power. And the only reason you've forgotten this is because the world needed you to forget. So let me ask you, what if the power you've been searching for has been in your own two hands all along? Before we go any further, take a moment. If this resonates, if something inside you stirs, consider subscribing to the channel. It supports the creation of meaningful, high-quality content like this and helps us reach others who are ready to remember who they truly are. Now, let me take you to the place where one woman's remembering began. Her name was Eleanor, a soft-spoken art therapist in her early 50s, with grey beginning to thread through her chestnut hair. She'd always worked with her hands, gently guiding trauma survivors, cancer patients, children in grief. She knew how to coax stories from silence with paint, clay, and touch. But after her husband passed unexpectedly from a sudden heart attack, Elena's world turned to ash. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She simply stopped feeling. Her hands, once warm and steady, went cold. She kept working for a while, but the clay no longer spoke to her. She'd sit in front of a spinning wheel, fingers still, breath shallow, waiting for something to return. It didn't. Until one day, it did. She flew to Sedona, not for a retreat, not for therapy, just to be somewhere quiet. The red rocks, the strange magnetic pull of the place, the wind that whispered through the canyons, it called to her. One evening, she sat cross-legged by the base of Cathedral Rock, a small ball of clay resting in her palm. No tools, no outcome, no pressure, just her breath and the earth. She pressed her thumb into the clay, and something inside her broke open. Memories flooded her. Not memories of thoughts or places, but of feelings. The feeling of holding her son as a baby. The feeling of shaping her first sculpture. The feeling of tracing the outline of her husband's hand as he slept beside her. Tears came, but they weren't sad. They were sacred. For the first time in years, her hands were speaking again. And they were telling her something she'd forgotten. That every time she'd shaped something, it had shaped her in return. You see, your hands aren't just tools for survival. They're not just there to text, type, click, or scroll. They are bridges between your breath and your body, between your thoughts and your actions, between the unseen and the seen. When you move your hands with presence, you activate your field, your energetic signal, and that field doesn't lie. Modern science backs this up. Your hands are mapped deeply into your brain, into the sensory cortex, the motor cortex, the vagus nerve. Your fingertips alone hold thousands of nerve endings. Every position they take, every motion they make, sends signals throughout your entire body. Try it now. Place your hands, palms up, gently in your lap. Close your eyes for just a moment. Breathe. Do you feel that? That slight sense of openness, of softening? Now, Flip your palms face down. Feel the grounding, the stability, the way your breath subtly shifts. This is not performance. This is programming. When you position your hands with awareness, you're not just moving muscles, you're shaping your frequency. This is what the ancients knew, in temples, in rituals, in healing circles. They weren't raising their hands to look spiritual. They were directing energy, real energy. In Hindu texts like the Upanishads and the Tantra Shastra, mudras, specific hand gestures, were not symbols. They were blueprints. Forming a Gyan mudra, for instance, thumb to index finger, other fingers extended, does more than look yogic. It sends a signal to your nervous system. Enter clarity. Enter stillness. Anchor insight. Every finger corresponds to an element. Thumb to fire, index to air, middle to space, ring to earth, pinky to water. When you connect them, you're not just making a shape. You're completing an energetic circuit. You're saying something to your system without a single word. This is what Elena was remembering. She didn't need a guru. She didn't need incense or mantras. She needed stillness. She needed breath. And she needed to let her hands lead. From that day forward, she began every morning the same way. Palms open, eyes closed, breath steady. She placed her hands over her heart and whispered, "I am listening." Because she finally understood that healing didn't begin in the mind. It began in the body, and the hands were the first to feel it. Not metaphorically, physically, neurologically, energetically. So many of us live from the neck up, disconnected, scattered, overwhelmed. We try to think our way into peace, into purpose, into presence. But the body is not an afterthought. It is the instrument. And the hands, they are the conductor. When you fidget unconsciously, your field becomes scattered. When you scroll endlessly, your energy becomes porous. When you clench your fists during prayer, your message gets scrambled. But when you choose a single, conscious gesture, when you place your hands in stillness, in openness, in alignment, your nervous system listens, your mind calms, your energy field sharpens, and the world begins to respond. That's not magic, that's coherence. And coherence is power, the kind of power no one can give you, because it's already yours. It's been sleeping in your palms, waiting for you to remember. So as you walk through your day today, ask yourself, where are my hands? What are they doing? Are they restless, guarded, absent? Or are they present, alive, speaking a language only my soul can translate? Because the truth is this: before you ever said a word, your hands were already telling the story. And they still are. So maybe it's time to stop silencing them. Maybe it's time to stop looking outside for the power you've always held within. Maybe it's time to let your hands come home. You are not just flesh and bone. You are breath. You are signal. You are field. You are form. And the energy you long to feel, the peace you crave, the power you thought was lost, it's right here, in the space between your palms. The air in Cambodia has a kind of weight to it. It wraps around you like silk soaked in memory. You don't just walk through it, you pass through centuries. And when you step into the heart of Angkor Wat, time seems to hesitate. It pauses, almost respectfully, as if inviting you to remember something you never realized you'd forgotten. That's how David described it the first time he stood beneath the arching gates of the temple. He wasn't a spiritual man, not in the way people use the word now. He wasn't looking for enlightenment or sacred geometry. He didn't chant or journal or follow moon cycles. What he did understand, however, was service, silence, and survival. For over 3 decades, David had served as a firefighter. His hands had pulled people from burning homes. They had broken down doors, lifted twisted metal from collapsed buildings, held the pulse of strangers on the edge of death. He was no stranger to intensity, but in the stillness of retirement, something inside him grew louder, the kind of unrest that doesn't scream, but hums beneath the ribs like static. He didn't know what he was searching for. All he knew was that after leaving the job, his body felt heavy, his mind loud, and his hands strangely disconnected. They twitched without purpose. They fidgeted constantly, like they were trying to do something but didn't know what. He couldn't sit still, couldn't concentrate. His wife suggested a retreat. He said no. She booked it anyway. The program began in Thailand and ended at Angkor Wat, a slow journey through movement, stillness, and healing. He rolled his eyes through the opening circles and soft-spoken facilitators. But when they reached Cambodia, something shifted. The group was asked to walk the temple corridors in silence. No phones, no cameras, no talking, just presence. David noticed the carvings first. He wasn't a history buff, but something about the hands caught his eye. Dozens of stone figures lined the walls, monks, dancers, deities, all frozen in intricate hand gestures. Some with fingers curled like spirals, others with palms pressed together, thumbs touching fingertips. It wasn't decorative, it felt intentional, like each gesture was a phrase in a language he didn't know, but recognized in his bones. He stood in front of one statue for nearly 10 minutes. Its fingers were arranged in a loop, thumb touching the index, other fingers extended in a soft curve. Something about it calmed him instantly. Not like a thought, but like a tuning fork had struck inside his chest. Later that day, their teacher introduced the concept of mudras, sacred hand gestures used in ancient spiritual traditions to direct energy. In Hindu and Buddhist practices, these gestures weren't symbolic fluff. They were energetic commands. David wasn't entirely convinced, but something deep inside him leaned forward. That evening, during a breathwork session, he tried it. Just once. He brought his thumb to meet his index finger, forming what he remembered the teacher called Jnana Mudra. The moment he formed it, something clicked. It wasn't dramatic. No visions, no firework moments, just a sudden, unexpected stillness. His heart, which had been fluttering with anxiety for months, slowed. His breathing deepened. His mind, usually flooded with static, cleared like glass. He didn't say anything about it to the group, but he did it again the next morning, and again, and again. Not because someone told him to, but because his body asked him to. What David didn't know was that Jnana Mudra has been used for centuries to stimulate clarity, insight, and calm. The thumb represents fire, the seat of willpower. The index finger represents air, the element of thought. When the two are connected, something profound happens in the nervous system. It's not just a shape, it's a circuit, a connection point, a signal to the body that says, align, focus, breathe. Scientists now understand that hand gestures activate regions of the brain associated with emotion regulation, sensory integration, and memory. The fingertips are among the most sensitive parts of the body, rich with receptors connected directly to the somatosensory cortex. Every movement they make sends data to the brain, and in return, the brain adjusts everything from hormonal output to heartbeat to mental focus. David wasn't a neuroscientist, but he was a man who had lived through fire. And what he knew for sure was that when he used that gesture, his system came back online. By the time the group returned home, David had developed a practice. He didn't call it meditation. He just sat quietly in the mornings, hands resting on his knees, fingers lightly touching. Sometimes he would change the mudra. Thumb to middle finger for patience, thumb to ring finger for vitality, thumb to pinky for emotional balance. He let his hands guide him, and they always did. One morning, he took it further. He sat at his kitchen table and placed his palms flat on a piece of paper. He traced them with a pencil. Then, inside each finger, he wrote what he felt it was holding that day. In the thumb, fire. In the index, pressure. In the middle, silence. In the ring, ache. In the pinky, hope. He looked at the shapes. His own hands reflected to him, not just physically, but energetically. That's when he began calling it his hand mandala, a living map of his internal state, drawn through the lens of his biology. David's wife, who had watched him struggle through post-retirement restlessness, noticed something had shifted. He was sleeping better, smiling more, slower in the best way. One evening she asked what had changed. He didn't say much, he just held up his hands. "These," he said, "I think they remembered something I forgot." It wasn't religion, it wasn't dogma, it wasn't something he read in a book. It was a return to movement, to stillness, to presence. He didn't become a monk, he didn't grow his hair or sell his truck. He just started using his hands differently, with intention, with care, and it changed everything. You see, we're taught to believe that change comes from the mind, that if we think the right thoughts, say the right affirmations, visualize the right outcomes, we'll find our way. But the truth is, the body knows the way long before the mind catches up. And the hands, they are the first to speak. Every culture across the planet has known this. From the Egyptian hieroglyphs to Native American Sign Language to African dance rituals, hands were never just tools. They were transmitters of energy, of identity, of connection. Even now in your everyday life, your hands are constantly broadcasting signals. The way you wave, the way you gesture when you speak, the way you fidget when you're nervous or fold your arms when you're guarded. These are not meaningless tics. They are expressions of your inner frequency. The problem isn't that your hands forgot. It's that you stopped listening. But the good news is, the remembering is already happening. In small ways, in simple breaths, in the quiet moment when your palms meet in gratitude, in the pause before you speak, when your fingers soften instead of tense. David now teaches a small class at a community center twice a week. It's not formal, no mats, no incense, just chairs in a circle and silence. He leads the group through a few simple gestures, a few steady breaths, and then they sit. People leave lighter, not because he healed them, but because he reminded them of something that had always been theirs. This is not performance. This is presence. This is not about spiritual aesthetics. This is about energetic integrity. And the invitation is simple. Look at your hands. Right now, look. What are they holding? What are they carrying that's not yours anymore? What might they be ready to release or to receive? Because the truth is this, your hands don't just touch the world, they shape it. And when you use them with intention, with sincerity, with alignment, you don't just feel better, you become someone else entirely. Someone you were always meant to be. Not new, just remembered, just home. There's a mountain in Northern California that feels like it's listening. Mount Shasta rises with quiet power, its snow-capped peaks catching the light like a signal to something far beyond the clouds. People come from all over the world to stand at its base, hike its trails, or simply breathe in its presence. Some say it's a portal, some say it's sacred. But most can agree on one thing. It changes you. Marisol didn't come for the mountain. She came to get away. For 20 years, she had chased everything she thought she was supposed to want. Ivy League degree, high-rise apartment, promotions stacked like trophies. She had mastered the art of becoming impressive on paper. But somewhere along the line, something fractured. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It was more like a slow unraveling. It began with exhaustion that no sleep could fix. Then anxiety. Then brain fog so thick she'd forget what she was saying mid-sentence. Doctors ran tests, all normal. Therapists offered strategies. Nothing stuck. Her friends told her to take a vacation. Her body told her to stop everything. So she did. She left New York, packed her bags. No itinerary, no 5-year plan. Just a whisper in her chest that said, "Go west." She landed in a small cabin outside Mount Shasta, thinking she'd stay for a week. A month later, she was still there. It wasn't the mountain that kept her. It was the stillness, the silence she had spent years avoiding. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't producing. She wasn't performing. She was just being. And that's when everything began to shift. One afternoon, she walked into a small crystal shop on the edge of town. The woman behind the counter was kind, but didn't talk much. Instead, she placed a small cushion on the floor and gestured for Marisol to sit. "Place your hands like this," she said, gently forming Marisol's palms to face each other, hovering a few inches apart. Marisol blinked. "What am I supposed to feel?" "Nothing. And everything." Marisol laughed awkwardly, but she did as she was told, eyes closed, palms open, breath slow. And then it happened. A warmth, a hum, a magnetic pull between her hands, subtle but real. She opened her eyes, startled. "What is that?" The woman smiled. "That's you." Your field Marisol didn't have words. All she knew was that something had just cracked open inside her. Something she didn't know she'd sealed shut. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Her hands had always been busy, typing, texting, swiping, signing. But in that moment of stillness, they had done something else. They had become aware. She began experimenting, sitting each morning in her cabin with her palms facing one another. No music, no intention, just curiosity. And each time, the space between her hands felt more alive, more responsive, like the air itself had a pulse. She started to notice things. When her hands were open, she felt calm. When they were clenched, her chest tightened. When she fidgeted unconsciously, her thoughts scattered. When she touched her own heart, her breath deepened. It wasn't theory. It was experience. She began to understand something no one had taught her. Not in school, not in boardrooms, not in all her years of high-performance training. She realized that her hands weren't just responding to her energy. They were shaping it. She read everything she could find on the human electromagnetic field, discovered that the heart, not the brain, produces the strongest field in the body, learned that this field extends several feet beyond the skin and changes based on emotion, breath, and even hand position. She wasn't imagining it. She was tuning into something real. Scientists call it the biofield. Healers call it the aura. But whatever name you give it, the truth remains. Your body is constantly broadcasting energy. And that energy, whether clear or chaotic, affects what you attract, what you repel, and what you embody. Marisol had spent years trying to manifest her dream life through mindset work. But now she saw what had been missing. Her energy was scattered, not because she didn't want peace, but because her body wasn't aligned with her intention. Her thoughts were reaching for abundance, while her breath lived in anxiety. Her words spoke clarity, but her hands, fidgeting, restless, told a different story. She was broadcasting contradiction, and the universe doesn't respond to what you say. It responds to what you are, to what your field carries, to what your body confirms. So she decided to shift her approach. Instead of just writing intentions or speaking affirmations, she would start aligning her entire system. Thought, breath, gesture. Every morning, she created a practice. She called it the triad. She'd begin with a single word, one feeling she wanted to cultivate that day. Stillness, confidence, love. Then she'd breathe deeply, in rhythm, allowing the word to sink into her nervous system. Finally, she'd choose a gesture, sometimes palms open, sometimes pressed together, sometimes one hand over her heart, the other on her stomach. The gesture wasn't just symbolic, it was structural. It told her system, this is what we are choosing now, this is what we are holding, this is the frequency we are claiming. And something remarkable happened. She stopped chasing clarity. It arrived on its own. She stopped begging the world to meet her needs. It responded in kind. Clients began reaching out, not from ads, not from hustle, but from resonance. People said things like, "There's something about your energy," or "You feel grounded in a way that calms me." She wasn't doing anything performative. She had simply aligned her field. Marisol didn't go back to Wall Street. Instead, she began coaching others, quietly, gently, helping them come back to their own bodies, their own gestures, their own intention. She didn't preach about energy. She just modeled coherence. One breath, one gesture, one frequency at a time. She now understands that manifestation isn't about what you want. It's about what you hold, consistently. Intention is not a sentence on a sticky note. It's a living current that flows through your thoughts, your body, your touch. You cannot say you want peace while your hands tremble with anxiety. You cannot ask for clarity while you scroll in distraction. You cannot call in love while your gestures speak fear. The signal gets scrambled. The field gets confused. And when your field is confused, the outcomes are inconsistent. But when you anchor your energy through conscious gesture, when your breath supports your intention and your hands become symbols of truth, everything begins to change. Because your hands don't just reflect your inner state, they influence it, and they shape the field around you. That field is always on, always transmitting, always shaping what finds you. And the power to shift it? It's already in your hands. Kyoto was never on Samuel's list. He hadn't planned to leave the country, let alone fly halfway across the world in his 70s. But when his daughter surprised him with the trip for his birthday, the ticket had already been bought. "Dad," she'd said gently, "you need quiet. The real kind." And something in her voice softened the edge of his resistance. Samuel had known chaos. He had served in Vietnam, built homes from nothing, raised a family on hard work and calloused hands. He was the kind of man people called when things fell apart. He was solid, reliable, strong. But inside, something had been shaking for years. A tremor no one could see. Not even him. Until recently. He didn't talk about it much. The dreams, the startles, the moments of stillness that left him restless. He thought retirement would calm it all. But instead, it brought everything closer. There was no more distraction, no more projects to bury himself in. Just space. And in that space, the tremors got louder. He didn't know what Kyoto would offer. He expected temples, tourists, maybe some good food. What he didn't expect was to sit in a garden and feel his whole nervous system begin to unwind. But that's exactly what happened. It was in the Ryoanji Zen garden, 15 stones arranged across raked gravel, no two visible from any one spot. A place designed not to impress, but to empty. He stood at the edge of the platform, hands resting unconsciously on his thighs, and without thinking, he sat down. Something inside him let go. He didn't know how long he sat there, eyes moving slowly from one stone to the next, breath softening. The garden wasn't speaking in words. It was speaking in rhythm, repetition, stillness. He didn't fully understand it, but he felt it. His body, which had been bracing for decades, was finally exhaling. That evening, a local monk led a small group in a simple tea ritual. No spiritual speeches, no mystical explanations, just movement. A cup lifted, a hand extended, a breath taken between each step. Every gesture was slow, deliberate, not for performance, but for presence. Samuel watched the monk's hands. They didn't shake like his sometimes did. They didn't rush. They moved like they remembered something ancient, something sacred. And suddenly, he realized that his own hands had been moving out of memory too, but a different kind. A memory of fight, of survival, of doing whatever needed to be done just to make it through. His gestures had become habits, reflexes, automatic responses to a world that had trained him to be on alert. Even now, when he wasn't in danger, his body didn't seem to know that. The next morning, Samuel sat on the floor of his room, legs folded, back straight. He placed one hand over his heart. The other rested on his belly. He didn't know why. He just felt it was right. He breathed slowly, counted to 4, then to 6. His hands didn't move. They stayed there, warm and steady. And for the first time in a long while, so did he. He began to notice his hands more after that. How they twitched when he read the news, how they clenched at loud noises, how they fidgeted when he was trying to look calm. And he began to change the way he used them. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just differently. Instead of reaching for his phone first thing in the morning, he placed his hands, palms down, on his thighs, grounding, settling. Instead of clenching the steering wheel in traffic, he softened his grip. Instead of folding his arms in frustration, he held one hand over his chest until his breath slowed. It wasn't a practice he learned in a book. It was one his body taught him, gesture by gesture. He realized something else too, that everything he'd done with his hands before, the hammering, the repairing, the holding, had been a kind of ritual, but without awareness. Now he was learning that awareness made the difference, that awareness turned habit into healing. Back home, he created small rituals to support his nervous system. He didn't call them that, of course. He just said he had ways of staying steady. Each morning, before anything else, he sat on the edge of his bed. One hand on his heart, the other on his stomach. 3 breaths, every day, without fail. Before difficult conversations, he'd press his palms together. Not in prayer, but in centering. He said it reminded him to speak from both strength and softness. And every night before bed, he'd trace the outline of his hands on a small notepad. Not to make art, but to reflect. In each finger, he'd write a word that captured the day. Frustration, peace, connection, tension, hope, whatever showed up. He called it listening without talking. Over time, his tremors faded, not completely, but enough to notice. His wife said he looked different, more rooted, more present. He smiled, said it was the air in Japan, but he knew it wasn't just the air. It was the ritual, the reach, the remembering. Because what he came to understand was this: the body doesn't respond to thought. It responds to signal, and the hands are the final amplifier of that signal. We've been taught to use our hands for tasks, to type, to scroll, to build, to perform. But we were never taught to use them to feel, to listen, to speak without sound. And yet the truth is, every hand movement is already a ritual. The question is, are you choosing it, or is it choosing you? Every time you reach for a cup of coffee without checking in on your breath. Every time you scroll in bed without noticing your posture. Every time you clench your fists when you're overwhelmed. Those are rituals too, but unconscious ones. And unconscious ritual trains your energy field just as powerfully as conscious ritual does. The only difference is, it often trains it toward chaos. Samuel didn't need a meditation cushion or a guru to change his life. He just needed to change how he showed up in the smallest moments. And that's where the healing began. Not in grand declarations, but in tiny, repeated acts of care. Now when the tremors come, he doesn't fight them. He meets them, one hand to heart, one breath at a time. He says he doesn't know much about energy fields or biofrequency, but he knows what feels true. And what feels true is this: that every moment is an invitation, every gesture is a choice, and every hand movement either moves you toward coherence or away from it. So he chooses with care, because he knows now what most people never learn, that healing doesn't begin with the mind, it begins with the hands, and that a life isn't transformed all at once. It's shaped, quietly, gently, through the rituals we reach for, when no one's watching. The stones of Delphi hold secrets. They have witnessed empires rise and fall, wars rage and silence settle. Generations come seeking something they can't quite name. Once the sacred home of the oracle, this ancient site in Greece was believed to be the center of the world. The place where spirit touched stone, where wisdom flowed not through explanation, but through presence. It was there, standing among crumbling marble columns and olive trees, twisted by time, that Eleanor realized she had come full circle. Months earlier, she had knelt in the red dirt of Sedona with a ball of clay in her hands, remembering who she was beyond her grief. That first quiet gesture, thumb pressed into earth, was the spark, the awakening, the moment her hands remembered their language. Since then, her journey had deepened. She had followed what felt like breadcrumbs left by her intuition, learning not from books, but from the body, from breath, from movement. She began to see gesture as something more than habit or expression. She saw it as a tool, a doorway, a form of communication that didn't need words. And now, in Delphi, she stood beneath the sky and placed her hands together, not in performance, not out of tradition, but in alignment. It was a small group, maybe a dozen women, sitting in a circle among the stones. Some were older, some younger. Some carried visible wounds, others held pain no one else could see. But all had arrived for the same reason: to remember something ancient, something soft but powerful, the part of them that knew how to create without force, to manifest not through striving, but through resonance. Elena didn't stand in front of them as a teacher. She wasn't there to instruct. She simply invited them to pause, to breathe, and to return to their hands. She began by holding her palms out, fingers slightly apart, resting in her lap. She spoke softly, not for drama, but for clarity. She told them about the circuit, the invisible loop that runs from thought to breath to form. that when we choose a gesture with sincerity, we are not just posing, we are programming. The women followed, mimicking her position. Open hands, still bodies, eyes closed, breath steady. And in that space, something shifted. You could feel it in the air, like the molecules had rearranged themselves in quiet reverence. It wasn't about belief, it was about coherence. Everyone in the circle had chosen the same frequency, and the field responded. Eleanor understood now what she had only sensed before. That manifestation isn't a trick of the mind. It's the consequence of alignment. It begins with a vision, yes. But vision without embodiment is just longing. Thought alone is noise. To create anything in this world, peace, love, clarity, healing, you must bring it into form. Not just with your words, but with your breath, with your actions, with the way your hands move through the day. You cannot say you desire stability while your fingers twitch with restlessness. You cannot whisper affirmations while your body curls into fear. The universe listens not to your hopes, but to your signal. And that signal is broadcast constantly through your posture, your tone, and most intimately, your hands. Elena guided the women through 3 gestures. The first was one of receiving, palms open, resting on the thighs, shoulders soft. It said to the body, "I am willing." It invited grace, insight, nourishment, not metaphorically, but physically. When you open your palms, your nervous system shifts. Your breath deepens. Your field becomes more porous, more magnetic. The second was one of grounding. Palms facing down, placed firmly on the legs or the earth, a gesture of anchoring, of stability. It told the body, you are safe, you are here, you do not need to chase. This simple change in position sent a message deeper than words ever could. And the third was one of unification, Anjali Mudra, palms pressed together at the heart, a posture found in temples, in churches, in countless cultures. It symbolized balance, integration. It told the body, everything I am, mind, heart, breath, action, is in agreement. As the women moved through these shapes, their faces changed. Some softened, some wept. Some simply breathed in a way they hadn't in years, because in that moment, they were no longer trying to heal. They were healing, not through effort, through coherence. Elena spoke again, not to teach, but to remind that every gesture is a frequency. Every hand position carries a message. That when you choose a gesture consciously, you're no longer leaking energy. You're directing it. She told them that their hands had never been random. That every creation, every act of holding, of letting go, of shaping, had been a form of manifestation. That even before they had language, their hands had spoken fluently. She reminded them that the field around them was not passive. It listens, and it responds. And when your thoughts say, peace, and your breath follows that rhythm, and your hands hold that intention like a bowl, then peace is not a possibility. It's a reality. It arrives, because the signal is clear. That is not magic. That is physics. That is resonance. Elena had lived it. She had walked through loss, numbness, noise, and each time she returned to her hands, she came back to herself. Not in performance, but in presence. What she knew now was that a single breath, paired with a conscious gesture, could alter everything. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because her relationship to it did. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting gold across the temple stones, the women stood together. No music, no ceremony, just silence. Each lifted their hands, not in unison, not in choreographed ritual, but in personal truth. One held her palm skyward, asking for something she couldn't name. One pressed her hands over her heart, remembering a loss she had tried to forget. One formed a gentle mudra, fingers curled into intention, and the air thickened, not with sound, but with meaning. Elena felt her chest expand, not with pride, but with presence. This was not the end of something, it was the beginning. She realized then that the power she had once thought she'd lost had never left her. It had only waited, quietly, in the still space between her palms. And now that she could feel it, truly feel it, she would never forget again. Because the truth is, we do not manifest what we wish for. We manifest what we embody. And embodiment is a choice made moment by moment, hand by hand, gesture by gesture. So as she turned to leave Delphi, the stones behind her and the sky wide ahead, she whispered a final invitation, not just to the women, but to all of us. Return to your breath, return to your body, return to your hands. Because everything you've ever longed to create already lives there, waiting to be shaped, waiting to be remembered, waiting for you to choose. Elena's journey was never about learning something new. It was about remembering what had always been true. From the quiet hills of Sedona to the sacred ruins of Delphi, she didn't chase transformation. She returned to it, through the simplest of acts, shaping clay, holding her hands with intention, breathing into stillness. She rediscovered the language of presence. Her story was not linear. It was layered, cyclical, tender, and in every moment, her hands were both compass and mirror. Elena's journey was never about learning something new. It was about remembering what had always been true. From the quiet hills of Sedona to the sacred ruins of Delphi, she didn't chase transformation. She returned to it, through the simplest of acts, shaping clay, holding her hands with intention, breathing into stillness. She rediscovered the language of presence. Her story was not linear. It was layered, cyclical, tender. And in every moment, her hands were both compass and mirror. The same was true for David, who found peace in silence after years of rushing into danger. For Marisol, who stopped searching outside herself and started listening to the frequency she was already sending into the world. And for Samuel, who replaced unconscious reactions with quiet rituals that brought his nervous system back into balance. They each learned that the body doesn't need complex instruction. It needs permission. Permission to pause, to feel, to choose, and above all, to remember. Which moment in Elena's journey spoke to you the most? A. When she reconnected to her hands through clay in Sedona. B. When she led others into sacred alignment in Delphi. Comment your answer below. We'd love to hear what resonated most with you. And what about your journey? Have you ever experienced a moment when a simple gesture or breath changed everything for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs today. If this message touched something in you, subscribe to the channel so we can keep creating meaningful